I started a video on Kusakabe Watercolors based on the Kusakabe Watercolors I picked up in Japan. I am here with my full set of Kusakabe Watercolors. I ordered these off of Amazon. They came all the way from Japan, so they had a really long way to travel. I am so glad they finally arrived. In today's video, we are going to do a from tube swatching. Then we are going to put them with their brethren in this homemade watercolor palette and test the whole thing out in both a swatch test and a field test. And the field test will be in a following video. So I hope you guys are as excited as I am. So let's get started. So a little bit of background on Kusakabe before we really begin. I paid $45.95 for this 18 color set just through Amazon. You guys can find the link below in the description if you want to get a set like this. It's available in 90 total colors and available sets of 18, 24, 36, and 54. You can also pick up colors open stock in Japan through Japanese art and department stores, which is what I did with the initial ones that I'd purchased earlier. It's primarily available in 5 milliliter tubes, although there are 2 colors currently available in the 10 milliliter, which I would assume would be a white and a black. Kusakabe also makes oil colors, alkyd resin paints, and oil mediums, and it also sells painting supplies, pigments, painting sets, Daler-Rowney products, precious mineral clay, and airbrush sets. And they began making paints under the Kusakabe name in 1928, and they also claim to be Japan's first paint manufacturer, although watercolors in various forms have been available in Japan or produced in Japan for a really long time. And they also claim that they offer a range of environmentally friendly watercolors, so this could be a great option for you if you don't want to work with heavy metal paints. So let's go ahead and get a look at these watercolors. Each 5 milliliter tube has the color name written in English as well as in Japanese, as well as a series which would denote the expense of this watercolor, a light fastness rating, and then a color number. So even if you don't speak English or Japanese, there are a few ways that you can actually identify your Kusakabe watercolors. There's a barcode on the back, the size, and then it also includes the pigments inside. So grass green, for example, is PG7, PY55, and PW6. And these are made in Japan. It has a tiny twist-off cap, much like a tiny tube of toothpaste, and you don't actually have to pierce the seal. So I appreciate that because I hate doing it. So the colors in this 18 color set are grass green, cadmium green neo, sky blue, ultramarine light, lilac, violet, cadmium red neo, gold yellow, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow light neo, and I wonder if the neos mean hues since they are working with environmentally friendly products. Cadmium yellow deep neo, mint green, opaque white, off black, Van Dyke brown, baby pink, coral red, and crimson lake. And this color palette reminds me of the traditional Chinese watercolor palette. So perhaps this is more in keeping with traditional watercolors from Japan and from China and from other Asian countries. So we are going to go ahead and do our from tube swatches, and we're going to do that on this Blick Premier watercolor paper. This is a cotton rag watercolor paper. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down some opacity lines using waterproof ink. So I'm going to use pigment ink for that. I'm going to allow this ink to cure for 5 minutes, and then we can begin swatching. Inside my Kusakabe package was also a small booklet, and unfortunately, I cannot read kanji, so I can't tell you what it says, but I think the intention is to demonstrate several simple watercolor techniques, which is really nice. This would make it, if you do speak Japanese, if you can read Japanese, it would make it a very accessible set then for a beginner, although And I will say the price that I paid per tube open stock is around $2 a tube. So it's quite affordable in Japan. I don't necessarily recommend you go through Amazon for these. And I got my open stock Kusakabe watercolors at Tokyo Hands, which is, you know, just a normal department store. All right, so this has had a chance to cure. I've got here a Sume paintbrush, and I've also got my paints. So I think I'm about ready to get started. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a little dot of paint right here. And then I'm gonna turn my paint tube over so I know which ones I've done, and that always works well for me. Then I'm going to use my paintbrush to do a mass tone swatch, and I'm trying to work small because I have limited space and it is kind of picking up the ink. Then I'm going to do a gradiated wash swatch. Then I'm going to do another mass tone swatch here at the bottom. And this is the method I've come to really enjoy for doing my swatches, this or the mass tone swatch that doesn't have a gradation or doesn't have an opacity test in it, because it's what works best for me as an artist, and it helps me judge the properties of the paint in a way that's satisfactory for me. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the rest in time lapse and then check in with you guys. Alright, so that is everything swatched. While I was swatching these watercolors, I definitely had some thoughts. What I find the most exciting about these Kusakabe watercolors, especially in this 18 color palette, is that I reviewed other Japanese brands in the past like Holbein, Turner, and some Gensai palettes like Kisho and Kuretake. And I really love when traditional Japanese watercolor colors are included, as it really freshens up the watercolor selection. So I feel like if you miss Holbein's Iridori line, which has since been discontinued, this could be a great alternative for you. Now, as you guys can see, there are some opaque colors in here. In fact, quite a few. Many of these colors are opaque. So they're very vibrant, they're very bright, but that may affect layering. So, you can also see that even just from a little bit of swatching, I have chocolate milk here. So the next thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go clean out my cup of water and we're gonna make a huge mess. So basically what I'm doing next is a bit of a layering test. So I can tell you guys that in general, you don't want to put your opaque colors down first and then try to put a transparent color over that. In general, that will get really muddy. But for this test, we're just gonna apply 3 layers of watercolor and practice doing various watercolor techniques just to see how these paints react. And they've had a little bit of time to dry on my Ink Essentials mat. So it'll also be an opportunity to see how well they reconstitute. And I think this test is an important one for these sort of unbox and swatch videos because it gives me a strong idea of the working properties and what I can expect and what I'm going to need to work around when I do the field test. So right now, I think these colors have some really beautiful color play. Even some surprising color mixes turned out beautiful, like, let's see, what is this? I think baby pink into mint green is just gorgeous with a little bit of yellow coming in. It feels very fresh. It feels very spring-like. Although I think all of these colors, at least for this initial pass, with the exception of Van Dyke Brown, feel a little bit muted. So in my subsequent passes, I'm gonna try and really get some color on the paper. While the pastels are beautiful, we do wanna test a range for these colors. All right, now that I've finished with that layer test, it's time to start filling some palettes. So this is a home aid palette, like I think I mentioned earlier. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna label the color name for easy refill reference, and I'm going to just keep them in the same order they're in right now. I may shuffle them around later. Now with the first one I did, I actually wrote the color number and the pigment, so I think that's a good idea. I'm gonna keep that up, takes up less space than writing out the color names. Alright, so as I was filling my half pans, I noticed a few things. Many of these colors are multi-pigment, and by that I mean 2 or more, which can be an issue when mixing and blending. Most also seem to contain either PW6 or PW8, white pigments that may be used to make the color appear pastel or more opaque or just brighter. A few also have not listed under pigments. This was more common with like the Aurora Blue, the Aurora Reds from my previous Kusakabe review, but the violet here also had not listed. So perhaps this is a proprietary dye or a mix. And there are very few single pigment colors. Ultramarine, yellow ochre, opaque white, off black, and crimson lake are the only single pigment colors in this set. Okay, so this has dried. We are now proceeding on to layer 2. So something I realized while handling these is that some of the colors are really very light and kind of desaturated. They don't really seem to have a lot of pigment. Golden yellow or gold yellow and yellow ochre seem to be a little bit weak, as is cadmium yellow deep. And maybe that's just my own opinion. I am noticing though that there isn't a significant amount of lift up with these opaque colors. This would be something I need to probably go back on these and do a scrub lift test now that they're dry. and before I say goodbye to you guys, just so that we know for certain. But a lot of the colors in the set just really lack any sort of punch. You really have to get a lot of paint in order to get any sort of a darker color. Okay, so I think you guys can see now that this is dried that the colors are somewhat muted, a little bit low key. We're gonna do our third layer now. I went and changed out my water, so I've got a fresh cup. I'm gonna try to reactivate some colors, and it seems like this Crimson Lake is very prone to reactivation. Let's see. Green's holding up okay. Brown's holding up okay. Okay, so the Crimson Lake is really gonna be the problem. And some areas do seem less prone to reactivation than others. So I'm gonna go ahead and add my third layer. I'm gonna try and get more intense colors from some of these yellows. See what I can do. So gold yellow was one of the colors that was a little bit harder to get some intensity from. So let's try working with it pretty directly, pretty saturated. And then yellow ochre was another one of the colors where we had some trouble getting enough saturation. So I feel like you'd have to do a pretty thick mix for at least these two colors in order to get any real color coverage. And I don't just mean covering other colors, but like actually seeing the colors you're using. Spring or grass green was another one that was a little bit harder to work with. My whole goal with this test isn't to make something attractive, it's to make a muddy mess or find out that the colors won't make a muddy mess. I never really used lilac as much as I should have. Now these opaque colors are really designed to be used in kind of the final stages of the painting, or only designed to have one or two, maybe two layers done on top of them. And then sky blue was another color that had some difficulties. Got plenty of sky blue now. Kind of mixing it in there with the lilac, and then ultramarine didn't really get as much of a chance to shine. And you guys can see that by using these more opaque colors, we're definitely getting a muddier result. And even doing wet into wet techniques, and I'll zoom in so you guys can see, even wet into wet, when you're doing it on an opaque white color, you get a really interesting and very different effect than what you would get doing wet into a translucent color. So to an extent, even though some of the opaque colors can be a little more difficult to work with for a variety of reasons, they definitely do have selling points as well that make them interesting and fun to work with. And I also know that Western watercolor brands typically prize, other than with like yellow ochre and some of the earth pigments, they typically prize translucency. Like Da Vinci, for example, prizes translucency, whereas, traditional Japanese watercolors, traditional Chinese watercolors, the translucency isn't really so much of a thing because they're not going to be painting as many layers. So this isn't even a judgment on how these colors handle as a traditional Japanese palette. Mixing coral and baby pink together. I actually really like how those blue flowers turned out. I'm gonna try playing with that in the future, doing an opaque layer and then dipping transparent color into that opaque layer. That seems like a neat technique. And you know what? I never tested black and I never tested white. So this is a fine time to do so. So there's off black. And here's opaque white. And I also love how the lilac kind of flooded into the black. It's got kind of a beautiful delta kind of thing going on. The white at least while wet, seems to have good coverage. So it's kind of like a gouache white rather than, and I assume, and in fact I'm going to demonstrate, I assume it's intended also to be mixed with some of your more transparent colors like this violet here, so you can make mid shades. Or we can mix it in with some Van Dyke brown and get a more opaque, lighter brown, something like a Venetian red. Or we can mix it in with our ultramarine and get almost a Byakugo sort of blue-white. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry and we'll see how it turns out. So this has had a chance to dry. Some of the colors are definitely more muted. That is something that tends to happen with watercolor. And while waiting for this to dry, I went ahead and I did my lift tests. And it seems like every color except for cadmium yellow light neo, every color but this one here is very prone to lifting. It didn't take much to get them to lift. Also, violet was pretty lift resistant. So that's 2 out of 18 are going to be lift resistant. The rest will lift fairly easily. I did do a little bit of scrubbing, but it wasn't a whole lot. So that is something you're going to want to be aware of if you're using these watercolors in sort of a Western style where you're doing a lot of layers or a lot of glazing. They can be very prone to lifting. Maybe you can use this to your benefit, but it's definitely something that you should be aware of. And I did promise you guys that I would label these colors for you guys. So we have Grass Green 088, which includes PG7, PY55, Cad Green Neo, which I think might mean hue, 065, and it's got PB15, PY189, PG38, Sky Blue 040, which has PB15, PW8, Ultramarine Light 022, PB20, Lilac, which is 015, PV19 with like a beta sign underneath. I don't know if you guys know what that would mean. And then PW8, Violet, which is 014, which contains PB29 and a not listed pigment or additive. Cadmium Red 163, which contains PR254 and PY186. Gold Yellow, which is one of the colors I said I had a lot of trouble getting an actual saturated color when I was doing kind of my little mud test. 148 and contains PY42 and PR101. Yellow Ochre, which is another color I had trouble getting saturation, which is 139 and contains PY43. Cadmium Yellow Light, which is in Neo, which again I think might be a hue. 114, which contains PY184 and PY139. Cadmium Yellow Deep Neo, 112, which contains PY152 and PW6. Mint Green, which is number 92 or 092, which contains PG7, PY13, and PW8. White, which I did not try lift testing just because I knew I wouldn't be able to see whether it had lifted at all. And I didn't even write down the information for that, unfortunately. So it is 273 and it contains PW6. Off Black 266 and contains PBK7. Van Dyke Brown 210, PBR7 and PR101. Baby Pink 190, PO73, PW6. Coral Red, which is 183, contains PO16, PY1 and PW6. And Crimson Lake 172, which is PR114. And I have a few final thoughts. There are a lot of multi-pigment colors in this set, as well as lots of colors containing white or opaque additives. Yellows, blues, light purple, and grass green are all undersaturated and rather weak when we're doing the mud test. So in an actual application, when you're actually painting, you need a lot of paint on your brush in order to get that color. My recommendation so far is they're great if you enjoy light, delicate watercolor illustrations that tend towards pastel. So I'll see you guys again really soon. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye, guys.